cards here. Okay, we're here with Mr. Mike Pohorilla, who was a member of the 8th Air Force during World War II. It's January 16th, 2012. We are at Wendy's restaurant in Groveport, officially. Okay, do you mind go ahead and telling us a little bit about your program there? And
alrighty. Where's the, you have the one book, don't you?
yes, sorry, he's got one.
Okay. I would suggest we just follow through. When I say turn the page, why turn the page, okay?
Sure. Do you have one? I'm sorry.
No, I just have the two. I expected that you would be sharing it.
Okay.
First page just introduces me pictorially. That picture was taken in November of '44. I was 20 years old then. There was a Air Force publicity picture sent back to your hometown newspaper. They were pretty good about keeping the hometown newspapers informed of what you did during the war. Standing in front of my aircraft. Okay, turn the page. Now, I'm going to talk to you about history, and this is one of my favorite quotations from Abraham Lincoln, who said, "History is not history unless it's the truth." So I'm going to tell you my version of the truth. If I don't know something, I'll tell you I don't know. Okay? I generally start out these discussions with this question: what makes a hero a hero? Hero tends to be, I think, overworked a bit. Everybody is a hero that put on a uniform, and in most cases I think that's probably true. But I've put the word hero through a prism, if you will, and at the other side of the prism these four features have come out. Heroes are patriots. Now the word patriot is kind of one of these amorphous words. It's sort of like the definition of that a Supreme Court justice once said of pornography. He said, "I can't define it, but I know it if I see it." And patriotism's like that. My vision of patriotism goes in many directions, and perhaps the most outstanding was not December 7th. I was just 17 years old then. I was listening to a football game on a Sunday afternoon, and the announcer broke in and told us about Pearl Harbor. But the next day is what I thought was defined patriotism. Every city that had a recruiting station had young men lined up around the block. It happened all over the country. And young men rushed to those stations, raised their right hand, signed on the dotted line for the duration of the war plus 6 months. They didn't know when they were coming back. They didn't go to Canada, they didn't burn the flag. And to me, that was patriotism. The second is spirituality. I think heroes have a spiritual side to them. They believe in some supreme being. During the war, for example, there was a pilot with the China-Burma-India theater. He came back, wrote a bestseller called "God Is My Co-Pilot." A member of my crew claimed that he was a devout Catholic, incidentally. He claimed he had the record in Europe for the most Hail Marys over the target. Heroes are disciplined. A lot of examples of discipline. What makes a bomber crew cohesive, or a Marine crew, or a football team, or what keeps you married for 55 years, like I was. And it doesn't work unless you have a sense of humor. If you don't have a sense of humor, you take yourself too seriously. It doesn't work at all. Okay. We're going to be talking primarily about the 8th Air Force. This was a shoulder patch that we wore on our uniform.
Which shoulder would that go on? All right, sorry, I didn't mean to.
Embarrassing question.
No, sorry.
But the next page gives a brief description of the U.S. 8th Air Force. It was formed and dispatched to England in 1942. Now, England, remember, had been in war for 3 years already. World War II began in 1939 in September. It had 350,000 airmen. It was the largest military unit in World War II. By way of contrast, the current U.S. Air Force has about 300,000. So the unit probably had the highest casualty rate of any unit in World War II. We had 26,000 killed in action, 20,000 POWs. And obviously a high rate of bomber loss. In the military service, we have what we called an MOS, Military Occupation Specialty. If it had any hint that you were an airman, a combat airman, that MOS, whether you were Army, Navy, Marine, Coast Guard, that had the highest casualty rate of any MOS in World War II. It was higher than the Marines. That surprised me, that statistic. Turn over, the next page is a description of my bomb group. It was the 385th Bomb Group. It was based at Great Ashfield, which is in Suffolk, England, near a town called Bury St. Edmunds. We arrived in England in March of '43. Flew almost 300 missions, very close, until VE Day, which was in May, of course. A few statistics. We lost 130 B-17s. We had 230 of our people killed in action. Over 400 missing in action, and again, over 400 were POWs. Fortunately, about 250 were able to get back to England even after they crash landed. Our crew was one of those 250. Average combat life of a B-17 wasn't too long. It was only about 4 months. And I'm going to talk about the B-17 in a minute. And interestingly enough, none of the original B-17s that we went over with the group in '43 survived the war. Attrition of men and equipment. Now, the next page shows the map of England, and the black dots were the 8th Air Force, bomber crew, and the fighter squadrons as well. I've located my particular bomb group in the middle of that. Now, you can see little dots that I haven't filled in. That was the RAF. England was crowded with airstrips, and I'll describe that on the next page. The UK land area was about the size of Colorado. And in that, we had over 700 airfields and landing strips. The airfields, as you can see, were very close together. They were so close that quite often your traffic patterns almost intersected, but not quite. Air control was difficult then. Weather was a real problem. This, of course, is mild. We considered this a balmy day in England during that period of time I was there. The fronts simply queued up one right after the other. It was the winter time. You couldn't get warm in that kind of climate here. It was easy to get lost because cities and towns looked alike. This country, if you fly over it, has a lot of distinctive features. Lots of rivers, mountain ranges. The cities all look different, you know. And here in this big midland of the country, you see the wheat fields, the 10-acre sections, that were part of the Northwest Territory and the allocation of lands in the 1800s. And those are quite visible. And then, of course, the Rockies at both coasts. You fly up and down the East Coast, and now it's just one masses of lights. But in England, you didn't have that features. Sometimes it was difficult at night, particularly, to distinguish between where the sea ended and the land began. Of course, they were blacked out, and we had to maintain radio silence, obviously. I have a quotation here from a B-17 bomber, the next page, which sort of sums up the whole situation when we think about combat. He said, when considering today's complex air traffic control system, it's almost unbelievable that we were able to launch hundreds of airplanes in a small airspace, many times in darkness, loaded with bombs, with high-octane gasoline, which was just as hazardous, with complete radio silence, no ground control, or minimum ground control, and do it day after day with young air crews. You fly commercial today, you fly 5-10 miles apart. We were yards apart in the air, and hundreds of us milling around. And the average age of an airline pilot today, he's not 18 or 20, as all of us were. Much older, in their 30s, most of them. And of course, they're the senior pilots, those that fly across the ocean, are in their 60s. All right, introduce you to my crew. We had 4 officers and six enlisted men. We came from all over the country. Let me introduce you to them. If we start at the bottom, at the left, that's Mr. Woods. He was the only really educated member of our crew. He was the oldest. He was 22. He was the tail gunner, and he had an accounting degree from Michigan. Shouldn't say the word. But unlike most of the people, he didn't shoot dice or gamble with cards. He was an excellent bridge player. He made a fortune playing bridge over there, and he's still alive today. Still lives in, I think, in Lansing. The next fellow over is Bill Henderson. He's from Hannibal, Missouri. Now, Bill was our ladies' man. There wasn't a place that we ended up that Bill didn't have some broad with him. Some lady, excuse me. He was the radio operator. The next fellow was our flamin' Cajun. That was Herb Boutier. He lives in Narlands. He survived Katrina and all of the myths and earthquakes that have, floods and the like that have gone out down there. Herb was the fellow I told you had the ETO record for the most Hail Marys over the target. A wonderful guy, and he's in his 80s now, and I had a letter from his daughter recently who said he's had a severe heart attack and he's in hospice at the moment, so we're keeping our fingers crossed. The next fellow was the youngest on the crew, Mr. Baines. He's from South Carolina. He's the only one that didn't survive 35 missions. He married just before he went overseas, substituted on another crew, and was shot down. Didn't survive the war. John Campanella from New Jersey, he was our flight engineer. Ended up in the printing business after the war. And at the very end is Quentin Schwartz. He was one of our waist gunners. Actually, he lived in Strongville, Ohio. Now, if we look at the officers in the back, the first one on the left is Wally Mellors. He was from Kenmore, New York, outside of Buffalo. Worked for Worthington Pump. His dad was a pattern maker, and Wally was going to follow in the footsteps. Well, after the war, he ended up with Chubb Insurance Company. And he was specialized in tracking down fraud in and insuring paintings and artwork and jewelry. You may not remember, but in the 60s we had a World's Fair in New York, and the highlight of that fair was Michelangelo's Pieta that was in the Vatican. He had to babysit with that. That was his responsibility for 2 years. Fortunately, he was successful. Where that World's Fair used to be, it was now where the Mets play baseball. I'm in the next. I'm next. Next to me is Jim Shoemaker. He was from Kansas. Fell in love with a Kansas girl. He had a moonstruck face all the time we were overseas. He missed his Debbie, I'll tell you. He ended up in California though. Ran a hardware store there and retired from there. He passed away last year in Arizona. And finally, Ed Hefner, our co-pilot. Incidentally, Jim Shoemaker and I were exactly the same age. We had the same birthdays. What a coincidence. Jim Hefner, he looks like a surfer, but he wasn't. He was originally from Tennessee. He lives now in California. And after the war, he ended up staying in the service. He was assigned with NATO for a while. And he actually flew Air Force Two on occasion. Flies dignitaries other than the president. So we were kind of an all-American crew from all over. There's still five of us left. Two at the bottom, Bill Henderson and Woody. And of course Herb Boudier is still alive, and I and Ed Hefner, the co-pilot, are still around. So half of us are still here. Good genes. Okay, let's go on. Paper's sticking together. There we go. Talk about the B-17, because that was the workhorse of the 8th Air Force. We had 3 air divisions in the 8th Air Force, 2 of which were B-17s. One was B-24s, and then we had a fighter group, fighter section. Incidentally, in the B-24 group, Jimmy Stewart flew B-24s. He just wasn't a pretty face. He was actually a squadron commander. He flew 20 missions. He was I guess a colonel at that time. He became a brigadier general in the reserves after the war. He died, I guess, a year or so ago. He was a great actor from Pennsylvania. You from Pennsylvania?
No, but his father is. And
Oh,
my
okay.
parents are both from Pennsylvania.
Yeah, where?
Pittsburgh.
Oh, okay. Opposite from where I was.
Yeah, other end.
Some statistics on the B-17. We built almost 13,000 of them during the war, of which 70% were the G model. Now, the G model is the one that had the chin turret in front. The first B-17s that went over in the war didn't have that. That was the F model, and they found out that they were very vulnerable to fighter pilots, German fighter pilots, so they quickly put that turret there with 250 caliber machine guns operated by the bombardier. Of that 13,000, there's only about 12,000 that are airworthy today. And they fly around the country on on missions, acquainting people with what it was like. Had a crew of 10. Modest cruising speed, only about 160, 180 miles an hour. That's kind of bush league today. Bomb load was only about 3 tons. A fighter bomber taking off from a carrier today can take off with about 10,000, 12,000 pounds. Jet engine makes the difference. Power. And we bombed at high altitude, 25 to 28,000 feet. It was not pressurized. What was outside was the same as what we experienced inside. We'll talk about that. The next schematic shows our relative positions on the aircraft. We had a tail gunner, 2 waist gunners, a ball turret gunner, a radio operator. The flight engineer operated a top turret behind the flight deck. We had the flight deck, and then 2 of us in the front of the aircraft, the navigator and the bombardier. All told, we had 12 to 13 caliber 50 guns aboard the ship. I was responsible for 2 of them. You'll see on the next page my little station in the front of the aircraft. Bombardier and I shared that area, and I was responsible for 2 50 caliber guns, and the bombardier also had theirs with his chin turret. I'm sorry that we aren't in the museum because I could show you a lot of these things here. The bombardier, well, let's turn the page, talk a little bit about our humor. This is a list of all the names of the aircraft in our group. Some of them are kind of raunchy. The Sky Goddess is there. We had an Ohio Air Force, all Ohio crew. Some of them are play on words. You'll see a Mary Ellen, then a Mary Ellen 2, and a Mary Ellen 3. I wouldn't name my plane Mary Ellen 4 under any circumstance. Turn the page over, and I've shown you a little bit better description of some of the nose art. Our Sky Goddess was pretty much that same sort of art, you know. This one here, this plane here is kind of notable. Did any of you remember Hedy Lamarr? Hedy Lamarr, she was more than a pretty face. She had some very important communication patents, which are still used today by the Air Force. It relates almost to the digital area as opposed to the analog area. So she had a good head on her shoulders.
So you had a woman painted on your...
Oh yeah,
Sky
absolutely,
Goddess.
Sky Goddess, yeah.
Was it modeled after anybody in
Well,
particular?
it was
or-
kind of, it looks similar to what that Hell's Bells there was. Or the next page over. This is one of the aircraft still in service today. It's in England, actually, with the World War II Air Force Museum over there. Still flying. I included Enola Gay in this, the next page over. That's Colonel Tibbets. You're familiar with Colonel Tibbets. He was, until he died about 2 years ago, he was on our board of directors at the museum. He also had a very strong Columbus connection. He was CEO of NetJets.
His
and-
secretary was from our town, actually.
The what?
His longtime secretary,
Oh, uh-huh.
I knew. She lived in our town.
Oh, okay. He had Enola Gay painted on his plane the night before he left for Hiroshima, and that was his mother's name. He was very independent. He was politically incorrect, the right guy for that job. Some great stories. I used to love to listen to him. But he died about 2 years ago, and he asked to be cremated. He did not want his gravesite to serve as a focal point every August 6th, the anniversary of Hiroshima, for anti-war demonstrations. And if you read history and are attentive to history, you realize that the atom bomb was necessary and it did stop the war. I'm here today because he and his gang flew B-29s over southern part of Honshu Island. Based on the Pacific Island hopping campaign, Allied intelligence estimates were that if we had to invade the main island of Honshu, we would have suffered 1 million casualties. Now, equally tragic, the Japanese would have suffered 3 to 5 million people lost because they were training to defend their homeland with bamboo sticks. So you can imagine just what would have happened if we had had to invade. We had luxurious quarters. We call these the Quonset. Quonset huts were named after this design, which was used on a Navy base in Quonset, Rhode Island. It held about 8 of us, and under Lend-Lease, the British gave us bituminous coal. It was lousy, had no BTUs to it, and you couldn't get warm. So, Yankee ingenuity, somebody in our particular barracks went down to the flight line, got all the used oil he could garner, set up a little tank high above the pot-bellied stove we had there, and a drip system with some copper wire, and that pot-bellied stove was red hot. A little warm. Well, we weren't there to have a good time, although we got to London occasionally. A wild city during the war. But we and the RAF had two diverse opinions on how we were to take the fight to Germany and Europe. The RAF had heavy bombers. They were very good aircraft. They employed night bombing. They tried daylight bombing and gave it up because the casualties were so high. They used what we refer to as carpet bombing, bombing over a wide area, and that type of strategy resulted in high collateral damage, high civilian damage. The Air Marshal of the RAF was unapologetic for his strategy. He said, "We didn't invent this. Hitler invented this type of bombing." He bombed Warsaw, Rotterdam, the English cities, London, and they did not bomb specific targets. They bombed civilians. They bombed. Opposed to that, our 8th Air Force mission was daytime bombing using a precision bombsight called the Norden bombsight. It was a computer. Solved a trigonometry problem. If the cleaning people have finally come, we can go back to the museum and see if it's open. I'll show you some of these things. But
do they have a Norden bomb
They
site?
have a Norden bomb site there. Now, on the bombing run, the minute the bomb bay doors were open, the bombardier crouched over the bomb site, hit a toggle switch, which locked the bomb site into the autopilot. He was literally flying the aircraft at that point. And every time he inputted data related to the flight of the ordnance, like altitude, wind speed, wind direction, airspeed, temperature, pressure, the plane would respond. He literally was flying the aircraft. And the pilot at the same time were also helping to fly to keep the plane steady so that his bombsight activities were at a maximum. And at the appropriate time, that computer said bombs away, or else the bombardier did it manually. Now, I'll show you a couple of pictures on what the two strategies resulted. The first is what happened in Hamburg after the British firebombed it. The city is gone, literally. The next page is a picture of a bomb strike on an aircraft factory in Regensburg, Germany. You can see there's a high concentration of bombs over the target. The civilian areas are relatively untouched. There's always stray bombs, and there's always some collateral damage, you know what you do. Now, how did that happen? This is a formation, typical formation that we used. This was designed actually by a Columbus native. His name was Curtis LeMay. You heard of Curtis LeMay? This was called, if you looked at the formation on top, it would also have a diamond shape. It was called the combat box. And it was designed that you could salvo all of the bombs at one point. When Bombardier said bombs away, all 36 ships could drop their bombs, and that's why you'd be able to get a concentration within a 1,000-foot circle. It wasn't pickle bar. They were claiming bombardiers could hit a pickle barrel. Didn't happen. Didn't happen. Now, and you can turn the page. I've listed here the major targets and cities that I was involved with, typical of other Air Force, 8th Air Force bomber groups. We went after tank and aircraft manufacturing plants at the locations I've shown you. Oil refineries, and I talk a bit about oil later on. Railroads and marshalling yards, all of those cities. Ordnance. The railroad marshalling yards, we often had to go repeatedly back to these cities because the Germans used slave labor and inmates from the concentration camps. They would send them in while, as soon as the bombers were gone and the smoke hadn't cleared. We tried to counteract that by fusing the bombs differently so that they would, instead of exploding on contact, they were fused for delays, anywhere from 3 hours to 3 days. So it was very hazardous. The Germans had no concept of saving lives or the like. They just sent the people in. And those marshalling yards were often back in operation again within a week, 10 days. So it was a constant repetition. And we concentrated on the railroad and marshalling yards to disrupt transportation in the period before D-Day, so as to disrupt any German plans for reinforcing the front lines. And during that period of time, the Air Force, 8th Air Force, was actually served to bring the Luftwaffe up. I was there while Jimmy Doolittle was the commanding general. And he visited a fighter squadron which were supposed to escort us. And the fighter squadron had a big banner that said, "Our mission, save the bombers," or something for that. Well, Jimmy Doolittle looked at that and he says, "Tear that sign down." He says, "Your mission is to destroy the Luftwaffe." And that's that's what we tried to do. But the overall military strategy was to send the 8th Air Force on these strategic bombing runs, lure the Luftwaffe up, and our fighter squadrons were then to do battle. And when D-Day came, the Allies had complete air control over the beaches in Normandy. Very little Luftwaffe interference. So the strategy worked. All right. I said that the B-17 was not pressurized. So, in a sense, at 25,000 feet, temperature outside was minus 40, minus 60. Incidentally, Fahrenheit and centigrade cross at minus 40. You know that. You went to school. Oxygen pressure at that altitude was only about 25% of what you encounter here. So we fought Mother Nature as much as we were fighting the enemy. And how did we survive? All dressed up, I said, here. We had a severe environment, layered clothing, and we had a life support system with oxygen, heated suit, and a throat mic for communications. Three lines keeping your life from being snuffed out. This was my order of dress. Layered. Regular underwear, then long johns, silk socks, wool socks, a standard uniform. A heated suit, which was 4-piece. It was like a heated blanket, but was made of nylon or silk. And it had a vest, trousers, gloves, and foot members. Over the flight suit, you put coveralls, nylon coveralls, then insulated boots, a Mae West. You know what a Mae West is? It's a life preserver. It was named after a famous actress during what. Yeah. Somebody said to Mae one time, "Goodness gracious, goodness, Mae, where'd you get all that jewelry?" And she said, "Goodness had nothing to do with it." She was a controversial gal in the 30s and 40s. Then we had a flight helmet, a parachute harness. That picture I have of me in the front shows the parachute harness, just to orient you. The very first picture. And the parachute was a nice compact unit that just snapped on in those little hooks that you see in the front. Then over the target, put a flak jacket on. In the pocket in the fights coveralls, we had an escape pack. It was let's see, about the size of about that size. In it we had a couple of maps, silk or nylon maps of Europe, some British pounds, money, compass, photographs. We had photographs in civilian clothes in case we had to parachute out. The underground got a hold of us and they had to make IDs for us. And we also, the officers anyway, had a .45 caliber pistol, which I learned to shoot, but if I bailed out, I would have left it behind, because you land in the middle of Germany with a bunch of irate farmers, you're lucky to escape with your life. They were there with pitchforks and everything else. So, you were like the Michelin man, I weighed about 135, 40 pounds soaking wet when I was, that was my fighting weight. And all of that represented about 50 pounds, 75 pounds in some cases. So your mobility was and you had to be careful about your oxygen mask all the time. Talk a lot about flak. if you study German, Germans have a genius for making big words out of little words. And Flak is a shorter form of Fliegerabwehrkanonen. It's a big word right there, Fliegerabwehrkanonen. And Flieger means flight, to fly. Abwehr means defense, and Kanonen is obvious. So the Flak was guns against, defense guns against flight. You may see a lot of B movies about air fights, that tracking and all of this, searchlights. You know, they did have those things, but what we had to encounter was a box barrage that I've demonstrated here. The Germans would just simply put a barrage of flak, timed to detonate at our flight altitude in a hypothetical air box that they knew we had to fly through. And some of the more important targets had as much as 1,000 guns. Imagine downtown Groveport, typical chemical complex with 1,000 guns, all pointed upward. And as the Allies advanced, the 88s, which was probably the best artillery piece in World War II, the excess that they had from their ground forces were then placed around all of their important targets. So as the war progressed, going to these particular targets became much more hazardous. So they used a box barrage. It was about 1,000 feet, which was about what our combat box was about. And the length and breadth of the target, and you just simply had to go through it. The fighter planes didn't go through it.
Where was the worst flak that you encountered?
Well, I'll tell you about that in one of the missions. I have to apologize. This was a picture taken by one of the members of our group, and they're just these puffs all over, and they're pretty dense. Of course, what went up had to come down, we'll go through that as I show you the next mission, next page, which is one of our missions. This is a mission to Berlin. It was, our target there was a Daimler-Benz, let's see, I think it was an aircraft. No, it was a tank and engine plant that we had there. Now, all of those little curlicues were flak concentrations. I have a line there that says bomb east. Every navigator on board the flight group, we use this kind of as we had detailed maps, but this was kind of a rough synopsis of our particular mission.
Was this an actual
This is an
map?
actual mission, yes. We took off from East Anglia, but instead of trying to traverse, weave our way through all of those on the continent, we took a route over the North Sea. Now, you see there I've marked Heligoland. Heligoland was a little island off the main coast of Germany, had a high concentration of flak, and the water around that boiled from all of the stuff coming back down again, because they were firing guns at us as fast as they could. Well, we found a little corridor through Germany, and then made our way to Berlin, and then back out again the same way. Now, if you turn the page, what I've done is blown up the area as we approached the target. We would come through that corridor near Hamburg, and all missions before they started the bomb run went to an initial point. an IP. That was a geographical point arbitrarily selected so that you had a tailwind. And at that point, you tightened up the formation so that you could get that nice bombing circle. And then the bombardier took over. And that was about a 10-minute run. And of course, the concentration of flak was heaviest at that point. And now, not every plane had a bombardier aboard. We only had maybe half the aircraft in case some of the planes were lost, and a couple of lead bombardiers that actually sighted the target. He stayed on earphones, and at that point, he said bombs away, and everybody hit the toggle switch, and everything was unloaded at that point. And at some times, at some missions, I was a bombardier, the toggleier. And one of the crewmen, waist gunners, would stand in the open bomb bay, and he'd say, "All bombs are away, sir." Or if you had one hang up, then you'd have to go through a procedure to make sure that they got aboard, because you had armed those bombs on your way to the target. Took out little toggle pins which armed the bomb, so you didn't want to head back with armed bombs. Now, we go to the next mission. This was to an oil field near Leipzig. It was one of those I listed called Merseberg. During the war, Germany had very little oil. They had lots of coal, and they had a lot of good chemical engineers. In 1927, there was a process called the Fischer-Tropsch process, which took pulverized coal, put it under hydrogen pressure. Now, coal is hydrocarbons, it's molecules. Put that under hydrogen atmosphere, under high temperature, high pressure, catalyst, and you converted those big coal molecules into small molecules like oil and gasoline. Practically all of the aviation gasoline was done with this synthetic oil. And it was run by the chemical trust IG Farben. IG Farben, after the war, was broken down into Bayer and BASF and so on. BASF is at Ludwigshafen on the Rhine River, and I've been there a couple of times, both before and after the war. Business took me there. But at Merseberg, we were there 3 times, because they managed each time. We pretty much destroyed the plants on each of those runs, but they would get them back in operation. Finally, it got to the point where the efficiency of those plants was down to about 20%. It's war of attrition. When we first went there in September, they had 500 guns, 500 aircrafts, high concentration. When we went back again on November 25th, 1944, there were 1,000, 1,500 guns. They doubled. Now, we made the bomb run, but over the target, Flak hit our number 4 engine, disabled, and partially hit the number 3 engine. They're both on the right-hand side of the aircraft, 1, 2, 3, 4 engines. Now, the B-17 was a wonderful aircraft. If I had been in a B-24 with 1.5 engines out, that plane would not have been able to maintain altitude. B-17 can fly on 1 engine. But when it does so, the fuel consumption just goes right through the roof. Now, we were still, we were over the target. We were still on our route back, and we stayed with the formation, but our fuel consumption was just untenable. When I finally determined, you'll see the line that goes through the middle. That was the battle line. It said bomb east, which means you bomb an unfriendly territory. Since you had to dispose of your bombs. We were over what I determined to be the Ardennes, and I said, well, we should be safe from fighters at this point, because they love to pick up stragglers if you left the formation. So instead of going back our program route, I gave the pilot a direct heading for Dover. And you see the little X. That's just south of Brussels. It's almost on the Belgian-Franco border, Flanders area, Flanders Fields. Pilot called me up to the flight deck and he said, Mike, you can hear the engines. He said, look at the gas gauges, and they're empty. The remaining engines are sputtering a bit. He said, go back to the waist, get everybody together, make sure their chutes are snapped on, and when I ring the bell, make sure everybody gets out. So I went back, told them to put their chutes on, and pretty soon the bell rang. I said, okay, you guys, come on, out, let's go, hurry. They said, sir, we're too low. And you were right. We were about 1,000 feet or less at that point. So I ran back, hurried back up to the flight deck, and I said, Wally, these guys don't want to jump. You're going to have to do something else. So he turned to Ed, he said, what do you think? Can we set her down? And he said, sure. So I went back to the waist area. We got against the bulkhead in crash landing positions, and I stayed on the intercom, and pretty soon he said, well, Mike, we're on the base leg, which means they had found someplace parallel to their landing. And then pretty soon he said, well, we're on the final approach. Well, we could tell that because we were getting pretty close to the ground. Pretty soon we came in belly up, wheels up, belly landing, dirt flying all over the damn place. And pretty soon one of the propellers dug in, braked this sort of swung us around. And we all jumped out. There was no fire. There was nothing to burn. There was no gasoline left. Matter of fact, one of the things that we dreaded most were takeoffs. Because if you blew a tire, the wing would dip. And that was it. The wings were filled with 100-octane gasoline. So the fact that we all survived was impressive. They gave us 2 weeks off, and then we were back on the horse again to finish our mission. But one of the British truck came by and picked us up and took us into Brussels, which was occupied by the Army and the Air Force. We found somebody with the Air Force, associated with the Air Force, and we reported into him. And Wally said, you have a phone? We knew the phone number of our base. Actually, we knew it of our squadron. The CQ, the charge of quarters, sergeant, Italian guy from Brooklyn. He was a pussycat, really. He just had an outward experience, outward personality to him, but he was really a pussycat. His name was Gattoni or something. Everybody called him Gat. And Wally got on the phone and he said, Gat, this is Mellors. We're in Brussels. We had to crash land. Everybody's safe. He said, tell everybody to keep their cotton picking hands off our stuff. We'll be back in we'll be back as soon as we can. Which we did. We had about 3 days in Brussels, which is interesting. And Will Henderson managed to find the girl. And we finished our 35 missions. Now, this last has a double significance. It's kind of ironic sense of humor, but it says what happens when you finish your 35 missions. This is an unofficial club in the 8th Air Force. Everybody who finished a tour, whether it was 25 or 30 or 35, was immediately inaugurated into the Lucky Bastard Club. And this is a copy of the nice scroll that I have. My son has the original. There's a copy of this in Mott's Museum. It gives you some indication of keeping a sense of humor while having serious combat stuff in here. Now, somebody did a study, believe it or not, at the Pentagon. I don't. They must have better things to do, but they did a study of the Lucky Bastard Club from the records of the 8th Air Force, and they found out that to achieve membership in Lucky Bastard Club, your chances were less than 10%. God was my co-pilot. Now, after the war, they put together a blue ribbon commission. No aviators, no military people. They were all science, political, educators, and the like. And they evaluated the whole bombing campaign in Europe and in the Pacific as well. And this is what they concluded. They said that Allied air power was decisive in the war in Western Europe. Hindsight inevitably suggests that it might have been employed differently or better. True. Nevertheless, it was decisive. For example, we went after submarine pens in France, and they were so heavily fortified that the bomb just bounced off. The submarine problem was solved in a better way by aircraft and anti-magnetic devices which were on the ship. So trying to bomb the submarines themselves was futile. So I think that's what they're talking about there. Could have been better employed in some respects. Nevertheless, air power was decisive. In the air, its victory was complete. There was no Luftwaffe at the end of the war. Even though they had the first jet aircraft, the ME-262 at the end. It was badly misused by the Germans. They really messed up. It could have been decisive from the Germans in that way. At sea, its contribution combined with naval power brought an end to the enemy's greatest naval threat, the U-boat. On land, it helped turn the tide overwhelmingly in favor of Allied ground forces. It brought the economy which sustained the enemy's armed forces to virtual collapse. And finally, if you enter Ott's Museum, on the wall, it says, "Freedom is not free." This is kind of a summary of how many people we lost, how many souls were killed in action in our various conflicts. The Iraqi freedom is bad. You can change that to about 4,200 or something of that nature. Incidentally, on the ground right now, you know how many people we kill every month? About 4,000. The deaths on highways for many years has been around 40,000. Do the first grade math. Close to 4,000 a month. World War II, about 300,000 killed in action. and if we'd had to invade, it would be more than double that. So freedom isn't free. You've been very attentive.
Well, thank you. Thank you for telling us your story. Ben, do you have any questions for Mr. Pohorilla? Or?
Can we show him the book?
Sure.
You have a list of questions.
Yeah, you can ask
He
me.
answered, he answered most.
Before you begin, Ben, let me just give you one more handout. I only have one copy. Every quarter at Mott's, we issue a newsletter. And back in 2004, it's quarterly. This was a fall issue. It tells my story. And it's a two-pager. And much of what I told you today is summarized here, plus a little bit of additional background. Okay? Okay.
Hey, Ben.
Shoot.
Sorry, Ben.
Yeah, see if you have any left.
What grade are you in?
6.
6? Uh-huh. You have good grades?
That's mostly.
They're both good students.
That's good. Incidentally, I have a graduate degree in chemistry, University of Pennsylvania. And I did industrial research for the first dozen years after I got out of school. Worked for a small oil company, and we had a very creative research group. And on my resume is this fact. In 1953, our research group developed and marketed the first multi-graded oil in this country. Now, before that time, you changed oil every 1,000 miles, but multi-graded oils are all weather, and you changed according to what the automobile manufacturer told you to do. So, after that, I ended up with it was polymer chemistry, and much of the market was held by Rome and Haas Company in Philadelphia. We play a trick on Mother Nature with polymers and oils. I was hired by Rome and Haas, and I spent the first couple of years with them. Going around the world, I was kind of an expert on multi-graded oils, so I've seen everything but the North and South Pole and the Taj Mahal.
Isn't it? So you traveled a lot afterwards.
Yeah. Then I got tired of time zone changes, so I got transferred to the domestic division, and I've seen every state in the Union except Idaho.
Did you ever travel back to your crash landing site?
No, but I've traveled back through Europe. There's a little story. Here, I'll read it to you. It says here, fast forward 20 years to 1964, and Mike, now a marketing executive with Roman Haas Company in Philadelphia, is visiting the corporate headquarters of Daimler-Benz in Sindelfingen, which is outside of Stuttgart. After a successful business meeting, his host asked, "Herr Pohorilla, your first visit to Sindelfingen? 9 for 20 Jahren. No, 20 years ago. But I didn't stay very long."
Yes.
Daimler-Benz was my first mission.
Ben, you want to ask a question or two, or show him your book?
Well, I had one question because one on here you didn't answer. How did you end up naming your bomber the Sky Goddess?
We didn't. We actually inherited from the first crew that named it. It had been they had finished their missions and it was assigned to us. So that's the story. But, we liked it. It was a good aircraft. Heck, if it survived a bunch of missions, it was battle tested. It was in good working condition.
Let me jump in here for just a second. Can you tell us maybe your most memorable story, something you haven't told us so far, something that you remember the most?
Not really. Well, actually, you know, I was asked that same question in one of my 100 delineations by a young girl. She phrased it differently. She said, at what time were you the most scared?" She used the word scared. And I told her, in my lifetime, the times that I was most frightened was the Great Depression. And because I was a depression baby. And she didn't understand, but a lot of people in the audience understood what I was saying. But that's kind of apart from what the question you asked. Now, when you fly 35 missions, they're all tough, you know. Either something goes wrong that Mother Nature has imposed on you, or else there's a piece of flak, or you get a fighter that comes in and gets a lucky strike on you. So they all go one right after the other, and you become sort of inured because on a 1,000-plane mission, 10 men per aircraft, that's 10,000 airmen invading Germany. That's equivalent to a division on land. And I had a front row seat, of course, being in front of the airplane, and you see the contrails from the groups ahead of you. You see other planes going down. But right away, you have a job. You keep your head inside the aircraft, and because I had to determine where I was at all times. Navigating, I had to be sure, because in case I had to lead the formation, I had to know where I was so we could get back again.
Did you ever get lost?
Oh, sure. You get lost and then you recover.
Did your experience during the war, though, affect your perception of the kind of people you were fighting against then, in terms of how you feel about them now?
Well, the thing that really got to us more than anything were the concentration camps, because we began eventually to learn about them a bit. And I remember one newsreel, Fox movie-tone newsreels during the war. We had just liberated a concentration camp, and Eisenhower had been invited. And he went in and he turned to his aide and he said, go to this next town, adjacent, and get the mayor and all of the people. You remember that story?
I know the story.
Yeah. And because if you ask the typical German then, they ignored it. They totally ignored it. And you know, if you're adjacent to a concentration camp, the smell would get to you if nothing else would get to you. So that was those things. You have to wonder how one human can do this to another human. You know, what's wrong? What's happened up here? And you know, the combat, I survived it, but I don't think I'll ever survive coming to grips with what happened in those concentration camps. I don't think I ever will.
I was gonna show you, because this is from like pictures of the navigator space and the tail gunner. Not tail gunner, front gunner. But this is a B-24, not a B-17.
I have to admit, I've never been inside a B-24, but
It's fairly similar, right?
yeah. The B-24s, incidentally, were made in Willow. Most of them were made in plant at Willow Run, near Detroit Airport. Huge facility right along the thing. But go ahead. Yeah.
And I was just going to show you that. And then there's like all these things. that
Yeah,
you need for
the EC.
storage.
This was a nice little handy computer that enabled you to plot wind course, wind direction. It had several tables that enabled you to convert from Fahrenheit to centigrade, and meters to the as an English system from CPS to inches and pounds.
How long did you have to train to become a navigator then?
Well, I said I enlisted in December 42. I was called to active duty a month later, late January, early February, and I went to basic training, went through a bunch of other stuff, pilot training. I flunked out of pilot training after 40 hours, and they didn't have room in the navigation schools at that point. So I had 6 weeks of gunnery training. That was a lot of fun. It was down in Florida, and started you out with BB guns like you have at a carnival, you know, tracking ducks. And you graduated from that into regular skeet. Then they put you on the back of a truck going 20 miles an hour, which triggered clay pigeons coming at you from all directions. So that you just weren't in a static situation as you are. And then you graduated into 30 caliber and 50 caliber, static, and then actually some flying and some camera work. So navigator school took about 6 months. So from the time I went into the service and I saw my first combat, it was about 18 months. I was a seasoned veteran.
You were busy at that point.
In all of your 35 missions, do you think you, with your one of your 2 guns, you had 2, right, that you were responsible for, do you think you ever hit a plane?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so.
That's consistent with what I've read. That, you know, a lot of people.
Well, you know, 36 planes with 12 guns, that's 400 or 500 guns. You know, putting up a wall of lead for any fighter that wanted to come through.
But you had some come close, I'm sure.
Oh, sure, yeah. Yeah, the talk I give, I have some pictures of MEs coming at us.
Ben, did you have anything else?
I was just gonna, like, there's different things, like
Oh yeah, I had one of those.
there's like people's stories for being navigators on B-24.
Yeah, I was like an aerial bookkeeper. I had to double line my log.
When you had your original flight jacket, was it fur lined or was it more like
Well,
that?
I had 2. This one here I bought since the war, but it's an A2. I was issued one of those, and it wore out. And we also had nylon with fur collars. The uniforms. Well, one thing I should touch on is the relationship with your crew. You know, 10 guys in this aluminum cylinder that you can punch a hole through with a screwdriver. You get bonded in a way that you never again experience in your lifetime. Therefore, you know, we had 4 officers, 4 sergeants. The discipline was absolute. You know, you gave them an order. And that's what I mean about discipline. It was automatic. It was in their DNA, our DNA. But your relationships were much closer. And of course, the services were still segregated then, both from officers and enlisted men and from the races. There's a movie out called Red Tail, and that refers to the P-51 group of Tuskegee Airmen. Incidentally, they flew with the 15th Air Force out of Italy. And they claim they never lost a bomber. Well, I think that's... I don't believe it. Nobody believes it. They hung close to the aircraft, you know. They didn't go looking for fighter bombers as the 8th Air Force did. So they protected the aircraft, obviously, but so did the P-51s. The P-51 strategy was to go to the staging areas because we had broken the codes. We knew what they were doing. We could read what their traffic was. And so the P-51s would go to those staging areas before they even got close to us, 50, 100 miles away, and destroy the fighters, get into dogfights at that point. So the philosophy between, I haven't seen this movie Red Tails, but I think it's probably something I'm not going to forget. I have some friends who are in the Tuskegee Airmen. Well, a very good friend of mine heads up the local chapter. Matter of fact.
But you don't think you'll see the movie?
Yeah. I don't think so.
Ben, did you have anything else you want to ask? All right, we'll go ahead and stop.
Thank you so much.